All right, welcome everyone to Focus, Teach, and Train events. Whether you have joined us before in the past or you're here for the first time, we are excited to have you for the last of our three-part series on nutrition. So in the first presentation, Marie guided us through the top 5 nutrition mistakes when trying to get lean and strong. She covered key points like how we underestimate our eating while we overestimate our exercise, the problem with consuming too few calories, and how to effectively utilize supplements while maximizing protein intake. The second presentation, Marie took us through Meal Preparation 101, where we learned about different ways to make meal prep easy, fast, nutritious, but also we learned how to make a balanced and nutritious plate, time versus cost-effective strategies for a number of different meals, and ways to make meal prep enjoyable with flavor and variety. Now tonight, for our series finale, to tie this all together, we're going to be taking a deep dive into some of the most popular diets that we hear about today, while we isolate the facts and the fads that will allow you to make informed choices and decisions when you hear different information out in the field from a trainer, from a health coach, or even when you hear it on the news with our January New Year's resolution coming up. We're going to hear a lot more about this, so we're excited for you to learn a little bit of a foundation tonight. Now, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you the mastermind behind tonight's presentation, our performance dietitian, Marie Pesacreta. Now, Marie is more than just a dietitian. She's a highly sought after, board certified expert with a wealth of experience and knowledge. Competing at a high Olympic level in swimming to working with the United States Air Force Special Operations Command, Marie has helped dozens and dozens of people, athletes, and everyday clients around the world to reach their peak performance. So without further ado, Marie, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Always thank you for those introductions. I think I've started every single one of these webinars saying, oh, this is one of my absolute favorite things to talk about, but we're 3 for 3 talking about fad diets, and not necessarily fad diets, but questions I get all the time about popular diet trends and parsing through the data of what's true, what's kind of overhyped in the media, what's completely false. So these are conversations that I have a lot of. I get questions about almost all of these diets all the time. So really excited to jump into it today. And hopefully my goal is by the end that you can kind of go into the world and make some informed decisions based off of this conversation of whether or not it would make sense to implement any of these things into your diet. So the main ones that we're going to discuss today, intermittent fasting, the keto diet, long name ketogenic, the carnivore diet, a low FODMAP diet, gluten-free, vegan, and then ending with DASH/Mediterranean diet. We'll get to it there. Excuse me, those are pretty similar, so I kind of lump them together. I will say there's a little bit more nuance to the first 2, so we might spend a little bit more time there, but we're going to go through all of these today. And if you have any questions, or if there's a diet that we didn't go over but you have a question about, there is a Q&A option, and so if you stick around to the end, I can answer any of those questions there. All right, so we're gonna get started with intermittent fasting. This is a huge hot topic right now. Everybody's got an opinion about fasting, it seems like. So we're gonna start with what is it, which is funny because in the literature, it's not even defined. So generally what it is there's some sort of fasting window, some sort of window of time that you're not eating, and then some sort of, we call it the feeding window. So this is the time that you are going to be intaking some food. The most common thing that I see today and what's kind of represented the most in the literature is the 16-8 method, which means that you go 16 hours without eating, and then you have an 8-hour fasted window. So that could be, you go from, what would that be, like 8 to 12, 8 p.m. to noon the next day, something like that. And then you would eat in between. So that is the most common way that I see this. There's also an eat, stop, eat option, which would basically be like 1 to 2 24-hour fasts throughout the week. And then the rest of the week, you can kind of eat whenever you want. So the claims that I hear most common around this is that there's this claim around autophagy. What that means is your body's ability to heal itself. So there's claims around cancer prevention when it comes to this. You know, if your body can heal itself and essentially clean itself out better while you're fasted, is that going to help with your reducing your chance of cancer? I hear longevity claims, just general, like staying healthier longer, youthfulness. You know, we're all after this fountain of youth. Is fasting maybe the way to get there? And then I also hear the claims that this is a better weight loss tool than other standard diets, that you can lose more weight and keep it off if you fast versus doing any other, you know, calorie restricted diet. So what does the literature tell us about fasting? Because we have a pretty decent amount of studies that we've done on this. So first and foremost, we do see that it can improve metabolic health measurements. So we're talking about cardiovascular disease markers, we're talking about like blood sugar, insulin control, stuff like that. We do see improvements in that, but I'm going to get back to that here in a second. Interestingly, one of the things kind of going along with that longevity claim is that, you know, you'll hear that it helps you balance your hormones, you know, whatever that means. But we do actually see that for both males and females, we see a short-term decrease in testosterone. We see that in males with a normal body composition, so leaner males, we see a decrease in testosterone, and then we also can see that in females. So is that good or bad? Well, it depends. You know, if you are a male with a normal body composition, then you probably don't want to be doing something to tank your testosterone. If you're a female and potentially dealing with something like PCOS, which is upregulating your testosterone, maybe there is some benefit to that, right? So just because that's happening, that it could be a positive thing for one person and a negative thing for another. So it is very individualized, but it's an interesting phenomenon that we see. So hold on to what I just said about it can help with a lot of these blood markers. Because here's where some of those claims kind of fall apart, and it's not so much that they're not true, it's just that they're kind of not true within certain contexts. So first and foremost, what we find is that fasting is not inherently superior at fat loss than any other diet. If you restrict calories by time restricting, which is essentially what fasting is, and you compare it to restricting the exact same amount of calorie restriction, but somebody's eating all day long, what we find is that they lose the exact same amount of weight. All that fasting is just reducing basically how many options throughout the day that you can eat. But what we do see in the literature, which is really interesting, is that we actually find it's one of the more sustainable diets, which is important, right? If you are unable to keep weight off based off of a calorie deficit diet, like, you know, maybe one of the other ones that we're going to talk about today, or just smaller portions throughout the day, but you are able to do that by just simply removing a meal from your diet, and that's sustainable for you. You don't feel super hungry. It's not hard for you to keep. That might be benefit enough to do it, right? So that is something that's interesting. It's not superior, but it does seem to be more sustainable for a lot of people, which is important. So interestingly, I just kind of said, you know, we see these benefits of improved cardiometabolic markers. What we see is it really is only in the context of people that are able to sustain it for a long time. And we see that happening because of a calorie deficit and because of some fat loss. So just like all of those markers are going to improve if somebody is obese and then they lose some fat mass, we see the same thing here. So again, it's not inherently better, it just might be more sustainable. And what's interesting too about a lot of those markers is a lot of times we see them kind of in the short term after the shorter fast, but then as soon as that person goes back to eating, all of those benefits go away. So again, it's more, is this helpful for you for weight management and control of intake in the long term, or is this just a fad that you're doing for a week and then you're going to walk away from it and then it doesn't really have any meaningful impact? You know, one thing that we don't see, and it's just because we haven't studied it for long enough, is longevity data. So it's really hard to make these longevity claims. Like, sure, in the short term, we see that yes, you are able to have increased autophagy again, which is just that self-cleaning out of cells. But again, as soon as you eat, that's just at the end of the fast, as soon as you eat, you decrease the amount of autophagy that you have, and it all just winds up evening out. So we don't really have any longevity data of, does somebody who fasts regularly actually live longer and have better health outcomes throughout their life, or is it just this kind of short-term phenomenon that we're seeing? And we have no evidence that, other than theoretical pathways, which again is very short-term, like in the last couple of hours of the 16-hour window, you are self-cleaning more, but then you are doing it less because you're eating more in a smaller window during your fed window. So we, other than just kind of like theoretically thinking about it, we don't really have any evidence to show that it has any impact on cancer whatsoever. And again, part of the limitation of that is we haven't really studied it in large cohorts for long enough. So maybe there will be some data in the future. But it's one of those things that just, ultimately, I think it's a little bit overhyped. That doesn't mean that there's not benefits, but the benefits get really taken out of context. So, with all of these, everybody always asks, oh, do I recommend this or not? Maybe, and that's gonna be my answer for most of these. Some of these are like hard no's, but for a lot of these, it's just gonna be a maybe answer. So I might recommend it for somebody who is obese and is struggling with portion control and does better with like 2 large meals rather than trying to eat throughout the day. Or maybe for somebody who has already hit their goal weight, but they feel they maintain it best when they do some kind of fasting pattern. That's totally fine. If you found a style of eating that works for you, who am I to tell you that you need to eat 3 square meals and 2 snacks a day? For somebody who has PCOS, like I said, it might help with hormone regulation for certain populations. It might hurt with hormone regulation for other populations. I would caution against it for that same reason. Lean, active males, we might just be tanking your testosterone for no reason. If you're really highly active, so if you're training for like an endurance event, or if you work out vigorously for more than an hour a day and you do that consistently, we do find that fasting can actually reduce the amount of muscle mass that you can grow. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't grow muscle while you're doing intermittent fasting, but you just don't grow as much. So I do kind of caution against that if somebody is super active and already kind of struggling to get enough calories and protein in throughout the day. And then, of course, anybody with a history of eating disorder, or maybe not a diagnosed eating disorder, but like some sort of nighttime binging behavior where they just tend to kind of get to the end of the day and eat a bunch of food. Well, if you've been restricting yourself for a certain amount of hours and then you get to that end of that restriction period, you're probably more likely to try and consume a lot of food and you just wind up eating more calories. That is a misnomer, is that everybody's going to lose weight on intermittent fasting. If you eat more calories in that small window of time than you would have if you had just allowed yourself to eat throughout the day, you are going to gain weight. And I've had people gain weight attempting to do this because they wind up just basically free reign eating whatever they want for 8 hours, and then they wind up eating way more calories than they otherwise would have. So again, it's individual. It might work for some people, not for others. And then I would say if it doesn't make sense for your schedule, if you work night shifts or have some sort of irregular work schedule, that this just wouldn't make sense. Again, this is not an end-all be-all. So if it doesn't make sense for you, then really no reason to kind of like fit a square peg into a round hole here. All right, so that is intermittent fasting, a very, short and quick of it. Next, we are going to go on to the ketogenic diet, or the keto diet. So this one is really interesting. The keto diet was actually developed for people who were resistant to epilepsy drugs. We found that if they put them on a high-fat, low-carb diet for a short amount of time, so 6 months to a year, they actually could help reduce the amount of times that they were experiencing epilepsies, like the amount of seizures that they have when people were resistant to the drugs. How this got morphed into like an everyday diet that is promoted for the masses, I'm not really sure. But what is it? So it is a high-fat, moderate protein, low-carb diet. Sorry, that last word there is supposed to be low-carb. So that's important. The high fat's obviously important, but the moderate protein is also really important, and we're going to come back to that. So what does that mean? That means about 70% to 80% of your diet should be fat, about 20 to 25% should be protein, and about 5 to 10% of your diet should be carbs. And usually we try and cap your carbs at about 20 to 30 total grams a day. So for context, that's like 2 slices of bread. That's how much carbs you can get a day. So a normal breakdown, like if somebody's just eating kind of a normal standard diet, you're usually seeing about 40 to 50% of your calories coming from carbs, about 30-ish coming from fat, and about 20 to 25 coming from protein. So really it's just kind of flipping a lot more fat and basically no carbs. What are the claims that I see here? Superior fat loss. Like I hear that you lose more fat, and it's easier at losing fat when you're doing a keto diet versus any other calorie restriction diet, that you get, I put it in quotes, like fat burning mode, like you're just burning fat. Your body learns to burn fat and only fat. And then I sometimes also hear these like cures brain fog and it's good for cognition type claims as well. So what are the facts? Oh, I already gave away this first bullet point. So yes, this is a medical nutrition diet for people with epilepsy that are drug resistant. Outside of that, we are starting to study it more, but that's what the majority of the literature is on. So here's the thing. When people think, oh, I'm going into fat burning mode, I'm burning fat, they are technically correct. What they want to be burning is the fat on their body fat that has been stored. But what you're actually doing is burning more fat for fuel, because you are pretty much only eating fat for fuel. So in no different than if you were to eat carbs, you're going to burn those carbs. Or if you eat a mixed diet, you're going to burn both the carbs and the fat. In a keto diet, you are primarily burning fat. That is correct, but it's because you are primarily eating fat and you are not actually burning any additional fat off of your body unless you are in a calorie deficit. And you're going to kind of hear this same thing. Like I just said with fasting, you know, you're not going to actually lose weight. There's nothing magical about fasting unless it puts you in a calorie deficit. You're not going to lose fat on the ketogenic diet unless you're in a calorie deficit. One of the things that we find in the literature is it's incredibly hard to follow. What's interesting is we actually find you have really high adherence at the beginning. People find that they can eat, you know, foods that they like, bacon and avocados and you know, eggs and meats and stuff like that. So they're super jazzed up about it at first, but they hit this thing called food fatigue where week 2 weeks, 3 weeks into it, they're really sick of only eating those foods and not having variety. So what we find is anything past a month, we have really, really bad adherence rates, which again is not good, because just because you do something for a couple of weeks and try some new diet doesn't mean you're going to have any long-term benefits from it. What we do find is that most of the cognitive related benefits that people report are either anecdotal, so people are saying that they're experiencing it, but we're not really reflecting it in the literature. And most of the benefits that we're seeing are in rat studies. Why? I think because it's easier to force rats to eat a certain type of food than it is to force a human being to continue to eat keto for months and years. We do see some improvements with both blood sugar and with cognitive improvements with people with type 2 diabetes, which makes sense because if you are insulin resistant and you're having trouble with that, the metabolism of glucose, so you're not able to remove that blood sugar out of your blood into your muscles very well, something like a keto diet might actually help because you're just simply not putting that much sugar into your blood in the first place. But like we'll kind of get to at the end when we talk about the Mediterranean DASH diets, we see the same benefits from the Mediterranean and the DASH diet as we do with the keto diet. So again, there's nothing necessarily magical about keto. It's just one of a couple different methods that we have to improve some of those health markers in people with diabetes. And like I just said, it is not a superior way to lose weight. There are, just with fasting, there are some people who like being on a keto diet and it works for them and they've tried everything else and nothing else works. And that's great. And again, I'm not saying don't do this. I'm just saying it's not magical. It's not a magic bullet. And if you choose to do it, understand what's happening and why it's happening. Excuse me. There are some people who really just like that they can feel full on this diet. Some people do better if it's just like, all right, I have 5 foods to choose between and that's all they have to eat, you know, like just taking that choice away. And that's totally fine. But like I said, the literature reflects that for some people it works really well, but for the majority of people, people just don't stick to it very long. And like I said, the fat burning mode that people are experiencing is just metabolizing the fat of the food, not the fat of your body fat. For those of you that are looking at the slides right now, I have this meme here. So not to get too much into the weeds of this, but people think that they basically have changed their metabolism when they go on a keto diet, and they put themselves into what's called ketosis, which is your body primarily running off of fat. What most people don't know is that if you eat anything above about that 25% protein number in your diet, what happens is your body actually converts the protein into carbs in a process called gluconeogenesis, and then your body just starts running off of carbs from the protein. So if you think of somebody who says, oh, I'm on a keto diet, and you see them eating just exclusively meat and eggs and a bunch of really high protein foods, they're not actually on a keto diet, they're just on a low carb diet, and their body is still primarily running off of carbs. It's just that the carbs are coming from the protein, which is getting converted into carbs, which is then being used as energy. So that's what that meme is there for, showing like most people that think they're on a keto diet are not actually on a keto diet. They're on a low carb diet. They're still primarily they're being fueled by carbs, which is coming from their protein. And being on a true keto diet where 70 to 80% of your calories are coming from only fat, which again is like oils and stuff like that, most people are not sticking to a diet like that. So it is incredibly, incredibly hard to stick to. I also just stuck in there that you can put keto friendly or the word keto on like pretty much anything on food labels and marketing, and it doesn't mean anything. It has no meaning to it. So usually just means we've added a bunch of fat to this. And the funny thing is it usually winds up being a higher calorie product than the non-keto version it's trying to replace. Oops, okay. Do I recommend the keto diet? Maybe if somebody's really committed to it and they have type 2 diabetes. I think because it's so hard to sustain, I would more recommend that people try to find some way to reduce calories, maybe attempting something like a lower carb diet that's not fully keto, because again, the adherence is just so low that for most people, being on a keto diet for like a month or two is not going to make a difference, when changing somebody's habits to be good, healthful habits for the rest of their life will actually make a difference. All right, so now to get to a very extreme, again, not even version of keto, it would be a low carb diet, but an extreme one that I've been seeing pop up more and more, the carnivore diet, which is an animal product only diet. It basically means that you eat only meat and fats from animals, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Sometimes you can eat dairy and eggs, sometimes you can't, just depending on what version of it you are doing. The claims I've seen about this is kind of impressive. I've seen anywhere from claiming to cure like all gut diseases, IBS, leaky gut, stuff like that, curing autoimmune diseases, curing psychiatric disorders, to the point where you can come off of your medications. I have seen that claim promoted very heavily in social media. And then this whole idea of like increase of testosterone and vitality and stuff like that. I was emphasizing the word curing very, very loudly. I'm sure you guys heard. All right, so what are the facts? This slide is not a mistake. This is the amount of facts and data and research and like actual information that we have about the carnivore diet, which is 0 things. And here's the fiction. So I always like to tell the story. If you guys don't know who these 3 people are, this is Paul Saladino, Jordan Peterson in the middle, and then, you know what, I don't even know his real name, but he's known as the Liver King. So these are 3 gentlemen that pretty much, not single-handedly, I guess triple-handedly, created and spread this whole idea of the carnivore diet. It was pretty much started by Jordan Peterson, who is a psychiatrist up in Canada, and he started these very, I think, scary claims that you can be on a carnivore diet and come off of your psychiatric medication. He went on the Joe Rogan podcast. It caught the attention. A lot of these like bro scientists and Paul Saladino and the Liver King both hopped onto it. They created an entire supplement line and an entire diet that you can, buy into like their books and all this kind of stuff. And what's crazy is all of like the influencers and people that you see promoting this diet, they all have become an echo chamber for themselves. And they all cite each other, but they all don't actually have any evidence other than each other that they're citing. And also what I find is really interesting about these three, well, one of the three came out kind of recently that he was promoting that he had his physique because of the carnivore diet exclusively. Turns out he was taking $12,000 worth of steroids a month that he was hiding from the public. And all three of them have come out within the last year saying that they're no longer on the carnivore diet because it led to ill health and heart palpitations and tanking their testosterone and all kinds of things like that. So it has kind of truly been a really interesting way to watch a diet kind of pop out of the thin air because of like social media and podcasting and stuff like that. So like I said, there's 0 human trials. There's not even like, oh, we did it in a petri dish. There's nothing. There's no mouse trials. Nobody has tried this in a study setting. The only evidence that we have is anecdotal from those who profit off of this. Because again, people selling supplements, selling books, stuff like that, or who get the idea from the people who are profiting off of this. A question I get a lot about this is, well, I tried it and I felt better. So if it doesn't work, why do I feel better? And I would say to those people, look, a lot of times when you try something really extreme, like a carnivore diet, you are significantly cleaning up your diet. You are probably eating a lot of ultra-processed food. You are probably drinking alcohol, relying super heavily on caffeine, all these types of behaviors that overall was making your diet not that quality. Probably not eating a lot of whole unprocessed foods, a lot of convenience foods, stuff like that. So when you switch to only eating grass-fed steak and eggs and, chicken and fish and stuff like that, yeah, in the short term, you might feel better because you've taken out a lot of the, for lack of a better term, crap out of your diet. Another thing I tell people is the placebo effect is very real. And if you go into a diet convincing yourself like, hey, I'm going to feel better because I'm doing this, you're probably going to feel better whether or not it's from the diet. And then a third thing I always say is, when you make such a dramatic shift to switch to such an extreme diet, you're likely emphasizing other health behaviors, whether you're realizing it or not. Maybe you're prioritizing sleep as well. Maybe, and again, you've cleaned up your dietary habits now, again, to an extreme that I wouldn't recommend and is not backed by science, but you have cleaned up your diet habits. You might be pairing this with a new workout routine, or again, maybe if you're a male and you're buying into this sort of like vitality mindset, you might be really emphasizing lifting, something like that. What I will say is, again, even the biggest proponents of this have come off of this because in the long term, it was really detrimental to their health. Most people that I see go on this, they do it for maybe a month. It's very similar to keto, and then they either just can't do it anymore because they miss all of their foods, or they start to not feel good anymore because they're only eating meat. So it does seem like any potential positive is a very short-lived thing. So I ethically can't recommend it because there's literally no data backing up that this is healthy in every way. It like laughs in the face of everything that we know about what a healthy diet should be. There is an overwhelming abundance, and when I say overwhelming abundance, I mean millions of studies on PubMed that talk about the evidence for diets that are high in fiber and high in plants. So I can't. I would lose my license. And there's other evidence-based elimination diets, which I just basically think that this is the most extreme version of an elimination diet, which we're about to talk about next, that I'm going to advocate for an evidence-based approach versus just, some bro scientist on Instagram told me to eat meat. Sorry, that just doesn't cut it when it comes to evidence. All right, so this is a low FODMAP diet. So this is the actual evidence-based elimination diet, and I'm going to talk you guys through it really quickly. It might be something that you've seen because I've started to see it marketed a little bit more. So FODMAP stands for fermentable oligo monosaccharides, so oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So these are different types of fibers that can be found in plants, and then polyols also start to get into like some artificial sweeteners, stuff like that. So basically what a low FODMAP diet is taking out all of these FODMAP foods. So all of these different types of fibrous foods, which might sound a little counterintuitive when I just said, hey, a high fiber diet is really important. But we will get into why on the next slide. And then again, also taking out some of those artificial sweeteners. Two things that are also included in the FODMAP diet, or that is a high FODMAP food, this is going to include lactose, so any dairy product, and this is also going to include gluten, so any wheat, barley, or rye. And we're going to talk about gluten-free here in a little bit. So what is the low FODMAP diet? So this is a validated, so studied and established elimination diet for people with IBS or IBD, which is irritable bowel disease. So it is meant to identify problematic foods, foods that are causing your IBS or your IBD flare-ups. So extreme bloating, extreme pain after meals in your gut, persistent diarrhea, stuff like that. The reason of that is because the different types of fibers are actually consumed by the bacteria that live in our gut. So sometimes if you have a bad environment of bacteria and then you eat certain fibers, it actually just makes, because you have those bacteria that you don't want in there, those bacteria eat your fiber and then they produce a bunch of gas and stuff like that. So it actually has more to do with the type of bacteria, but we can kind of eliminate certain fibers and reduce those symptoms from happening. So like I said here, by quote unquote starving these certain bad bacteria, you can potentially reduce SIBO is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So reducing the amount of that bad bacteria that you have in your gut that is causing your bloating and causing your pain. One of the things that is really, really frustrating me in the diet space right now is people promoting this as like some kind of diet trend that you should always be on. A low FODMAP diet is not a long-term diet, and it is not a weight loss diet. It is meant to identify foods that are not pairing well with your gut and your gut microbacteria. What we do is we basically eliminate, it's a huge amount of foods. I mean, think of all of the fiber foods, plus all of the dairies, plus all the glutens. So it's a low fruit and vegetable diet, which is not ideal. But what we do is in the short term, for about a month, we exclude all of those from the diet and then slowly one by one add them back in to see which one sets off your symptoms. So this is not something that should be done without a medical team. Really, we recommend that you do this under the supervision of a medical team and a dietitian. It puts you at a very high risk of certain vitamin and mineral deficiency because you're restricting so much stuff out of your diet. Again, this diet is only meant to be on for about a month, and then you start the reintroduction phase. But unfortunately, diet culture has gotten its hands on it and is now saying that for some reason, high FODMAP foods are bad for you, which is absolutely not the case. And you should absolutely not be restricting these things unless it's medically necessary to. Which is basically what I'm just saying here. A low FODMAP diet is really, really hard to stick to, and it takes a lot of navigating. So I would recommend that if you are somebody that's experiencing IBS or IBD and you want to try this, that you do so with a dietitian or some sort of medical team. All right, so that kind of transitions into a gluten-free diet. Again, this would be something that you would take out during a low FODMAP diet. So what is gluten? You know, it's so funny. So many people try to avoid gluten and they have no idea what it actually is. So a gluten is simply a protein. It's found in wheat, barley, rye, and it is responsible for the texture of bread products. So if you've ever had like a gluten-free bread, you might notice the texture is a little weird. That's why. So there are certain populations that absolutely need to avoid gluten, and that is somebody with celiac disease. So celiac disease is an autoimmune response to gluten ingestion. You basically attack your own body when you eat gluten. If you have been diagnosed with celiac disease, then you need to avoid gluten for the rest of your life, absolutely. The good thing about celiac disease is that it can be objectively measured. It's not easy to get a diagnosis. It can be frustrating, but you can get it through lab work, you can get it through an endoscopy, and you can get an absolute yes or no, do I have celiac disease? And it does affect about 1% of the population. A gluten intolerance is a little bit different, and it's more of a diagnosis of exclusion, of you're having some sort of gut issues and reaction and bloating and pain, and we can't quite figure out what it is. And after we've worked you up for a bunch of other stuff, we're just going to recommend that you stay away from gluten. If you do that and your symptoms improve, then we call it a gluten intolerance, but it is not the autoimmune disease, celiac disease. And based off of the literature, it seems like about 6% of the population has this, but it's kind of hard to capture because, again, it's not objectively measured quite as easily as celiac disease. But going back to that, that's only about 7% of the population that needs to be avoiding gluten. And yet we had this whole craze maybe like 5 years ago where, 80% of the population felt like they needed to avoid gluten. So the facts are, like I just said, some people do not tolerate gluten. And if you take it out of your diet and you feel way better and all of your, IBS symptoms go away, then I would recommend continuing to eat gluten-free. So it can be something that irritates somebody's gut if their gut is already compromised. So for example, if you already have some sort of damage from some sort of inflammatory condition going on, gluten might make it worse. But one thing that is false about gluten is that gluten causes these things. And that is not true. We have no evidence that gluten itself is what's destroying people's gut lining, that it's causing stuff like brain fog. So just know that if you have no issues digesting gluten, you have no issues with and I don't mean bloating like, oh, I ate a big meal and my belly's protruding a little. I mean like the really extreme distension and pain, like I said, diarrhea, stuff like that. If you're experiencing that and then you take gluten out and all of a sudden that goes away, then that's a legitimate reason to avoid gluten. But if you're not experiencing that, I do want to bust the myth that gluten is going to cause any harm to somebody's gut that is otherwise intact. Some other stuff, gluten-free is inherently better than gluten-containing products. That is, again, simply not true. We've taken out one particular protein. There's nothing harmful about that protein for, oh gosh, math, 93% of the population on average. And I have heard people say like, oh, gluten-free diet made me lose weight. Well, it wasn't the gluten, it was the fact that you took out a bunch of bread products and a bunch of bread products that people tend to overeat. So again, it always comes back to calories. When you restrict a large portion of your diet, you will be eating less calories for most people. And then, like I said, my recommendations is only in the context of celiac disease or a gluten intolerance should you do a gluten-free diet. Now you can try it if you're having an IBS related symptoms and you want to try it. There's nothing wrong with that, but I don't see any benefit in committing to a gluten-free diet if you don't have to. All right, vegan diet, switching gears a little bit. So I think most people know vegan diet is excluding all animal products and byproducts. The claims that I see here, now we're sticking just to nutrition claims. I know that there's environmental claims and all that kind of stuff. We're just talking nutrition here. The claims is that it's better for heart health, better for longevity, and that vegan foods are healthier than non-vegan foods. So we actually do see pretty significant improvements in cardiovascular markers when somebody goes on a vegan diet. So it can reduce cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood pressure, and it can actually reduce your LDL cholesterol, which is your bad cholesterol, with the same power as a statin drug, which is the cholesterol reducing drug, which is pretty crazy that a diet can be as powerful as a medication. We also see that populations have lower that follow vegan diet have a lower BMI than other types of diets, so a smaller body mass index, indicating lower rates of obesity. But it's not completely harmless. What we also see with the vegan diet is that we have really high rates of iron deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency, protein deficiency, overall calorie deficiency a lot of the time. And like I just said, we do see lower BMIs, but a lot of times what we see is this idea of kind of like the skinny fat. We see people that follow a vegan diet have significantly lower skeletal muscle mass. So while your cardiometabolic markers may improve, we see significant deteriorations to your skeletal muscle mass and your overall bone and skeletal muscle mass health. So when you're talking about longevity, heart health is one piece of it, mobility and muscle mass health and metabolic health is another piece of that, right? So, you know, how good is having good heart health if you don't have the muscle mass in your 70s and 80s to actually move around? You're also at a much higher risk of osteoporosis with the vegan diet. So, you know, there are benefits for sure represented in the literature, but there's also detriments represented in the literature. I did want to throw out on here that if you see plant-based on anything, it has no legal definition. Doesn't even have to be vegan. If you see that on marketing, that product doesn't even have to be vegan. And just because something is a vegan product similar to gluten-free, it does not inherently mean that it's better for you. Oreos is always a go-to example. Oreos are vegan. Are Oreos good for you? I think most people would know that they're not. So I don't typically recommend a vegan diet unless somebody is just very morally convicted to do so, in which case I will help them navigate the best chance for improving muscle mass and improving bone density and bone health within the vegan diet. It is possible. And I have vegan athletes. I have very advanced vegan athletes. So I'm not saying that you can't be healthy on a vegan diet, but it just takes a lot more concentration and intentionality with your diet and what foods you're choosing versus somebody that's got an open diet, and you don't have to think quite as much about like, oh, am I getting enough magnesium? Am I getting enough calcium? Stuff like that. And then when somebody's just toying with it for the idea of like the heart health benefits, and we're going to end on the DASH and Mediterranean diet, is what we really see is that the DASH and Mediterranean diets show the same heart health benefits without any of those skeletal muscle mass and osteoporosis type detriments. So I would try and steer somebody, again, unless it's the kind of the moral convictions argument, I would try and steer somebody more to a DASH diet. All right, so the last two I'm going to talk about, they're essentially the same diets, so that's why I've lumped them together, are the Mediterranean and the DASH diets. So you can see here, I'm not going to read all this off, but essentially the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diets are diets that are, I call them plant forward or plant focused, but they're not vegan, they're not vegetarian. They do include lean meats, they do include red meat, but it is essentially mostly unprocessed and unrefined diet. So you're looking at whole grains, vegetables, leafy greens, nuts, seeds, berries, poultry, fish, lean red meats, and then really reducing stuff like saturated fats and high sugar containing foods and pastries and sweets and butters and high fat cheeses and stuff like that. So if you look at this, I don't think anything on this list is surprising as being like a good food or foods that you should limit. I mean, this is generally speaking kind of just what a healthy, balanced diet would look like. If you look at the official recommendations for the DASH diet, so DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. They are so similar that it's not even worth pointing out the very minute differences. It's essentially the intake of sodium and potassium, but if you're eating in a Mediterranean diet, you're not even getting enough sodium and potassium for it to even matter. So I call them the same thing. And what's so cool about these diets is if you really look into the literature, we can see enormous improvements in people's health when they follow these styles of diets. Really significant reduction in incidences of cancer. So you can see here breast cancer, colorectal cancer, 30% reduced risk incidence for colorectal cancer. That's because of the high fiber of, intake with the diet. 60% reduced risk of cervical cancer incidence. I mean, these are like pretty astounding numbers to see in the literature. Also, when we're looking, like I said, the cardiovascular health, I mean, there's this thing that we look at in literature and in research called all-cause mortality, which is like all of the different ways that you can die from chronic disease. And what we see is that with these diets, we have a reduction in all-cause mortality, meaning everything that you can possibly die of that's lifestyle related is reduced. Your risk is reduced when you're eating either with a Mediterranean style diet or with a DASH style diet. We also see, and that includes impacts on brain, like neurodegenerative diseases, risks of Alzheimer's, stuff like that. I'm not getting super in the weeds with all of the data. I could, it's really interesting, but I'm just kind of giving you a broad spectrum of this diet and some of the benefits that we see represented in research. So key takeaways here is that obviously the last one I talked about, Mediterranean and DASH, that's kind of like the gold standard of like, ideally, this is what we want people to kind of base their diet around. Now, there's a misunderstanding of like, do I have to eat Greek food exclusively? No, you can eat any type of cuisine focusing on plant forward and, lean proteins and berries and nuts and seeds. It doesn't matter what the cuisine is, just as long as those are the foods that you're focusing on. Any of the other diets that we talked about today, any diet that you do for a short period of time in the grand scheme of your life is not going to have any impact on longevity. So as much as people tell you like, oh, fasting is going to make you live longer, if you do intermittent fasting for a week, that's not going to make you live longer. So it's better to make healthful dietary choices that you can stick to for a lifetime that have meaningful health outcomes, like eating in the style of a DASH diet or a Mediterranean diet. Versus just trying a one-off, two-off diet for the sake of weight loss or whatever claim that you hear. It's super restrictive and then you just can't stick to it. There are some things that we talked about today, for example, keto or fasting, that have pros and cons that, I'm not going to say like, oh, there's no reason to not try it, or there's no reason to try it or whatever. But a takeaway is I hope that you kind of understand like a realistic expectation that none of these are magical. And if you do lose weight or see any benefits, why that's happening. I put on here, don't trust shirtless men in grocery stores. That's because, a lot of these influencers, especially for carnivore, some of your more extreme ones tend to just run around grocery stores, yelling shirtless, yelling that things are unhealthy. And then I close with extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if somebody is claiming that this diet is the fountain of youth, they better have a lot of evidence to back that up. And frankly, I have yet to see anything that comes even close to the amount of evidence that we have for something like a Mediterranean diet, which is simply just eat food that's unprocessed, focusing on plants forward. So until we see something with a bulk of evidence that big, I'm going to stick to, what we have a lot of evidence for. So with that, I am done. Thank you guys so much for attending. I do want to say one last time that I do one-on-one counseling. So a lot of things that I said today was like, hey, this is individual. Let's see if it works with your schedule, stuff like that. So that's the type of stuff that I help people navigate with one-on-one counseling. I'm very excited. We are going to start group nutrition sessions, small groups here soon, something that we're working through right now. So very excited to get started with that. And hopefully I will see you guys in some of those. And I believe that we are scheming up another webinar series here in the near future. So yeah, thank you guys so much. I have so much fun doing all of these, and I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
That was incredible. Yeah, for the next series, we want your input. So please feel free to email Marie with topics or different types of content that you would like to learn more about related to the nutrition performance space. But before we end tonight, as promised, We do have a few questions that came through the chat, Marie. If you don't mind, we'll go through our Q&A section. I have to give it to you. That might have been the best one. A lot of people are asking for pre-recorded videos of the first part 1, part 2, but part 3 really took it home. That was incredible. So I have a few questions, and let's get right into it. So the first question came in. How do you know if something you see online, which I believe we were just talking about before, how do you know if something you see online is good or bad information?
Oh, I don't know if the people are going to like this answer or not, but what's funny is bad information, if you look at what they're telling you, tends to be very black and white. Like, this thing is bad, this thing will kill you, this thing is, or only my thing is good, my thing is the only way, whatever it is. Whereas if you look at somebody with actual expertise, they're going to understand the nuance of a situation and of a field, and they're going to say, hey, this might be good for this situation, but maybe not this, and this is the limitations of our understanding. So when you find somebody with more of a gray area answer, which is what makes it so hard, especially in nutrition, because people just want to be told, or they want a black and white, or they want to believe the guy that says just eat meat and all of your diseases go away, you know what I mean? But really and truly, like, looking for somebody that has credentials, but even, somebody with credentials can go rogue, and I would say it's the best place, but you don't necessarily have to have that credentialing. Now, most of the time you would want to find somebody that's credentialed. But then also just look at how they're presenting the information. And if you see a lot of maybes and sometimes, and the bulk of the evidence says, and our understanding is, stuff like that, you're in a good place. If you see my supplement will cure you, then I would steer clear.
Yeah, so if it's more binary, if it seems black and white, and it's absolute answers, question it a little bit.
Yeah.
That's where you can start seeing researchers or people on the field cherry pick research to prove their point specifically. We saw that in Game Changers and Netflix documentary.
Exactly.
Amazing. Next question that came in: do you follow any of these diets?
I try. I try my best to eat in a Mediterranean style diet. I will say, what I like about that style of eating is that, unlike some of the other things we talked about today, there's no rules. There's guidelines, but there's no rules. And there are days that I 0% follow it, right? And everybody runs out of time and, just needs to grab something. But I do, generally speaking, try to eat mostly unprocessed, home-cooked type foods, focusing on plants. Some days it happens, some days it doesn't, but I don't beat myself up over the days that it doesn't.
Awesome. Okay, we have time we can get these last. Is calories or food more important for a diet?
Ooh, that's a good question. It kind of depends on the goal. I would say, if weight loss is the goal, then ultimately it's going to come down to calories. But I don't recommend doing something to reduce your calories that decreases the quality of your food. So for example, if you were to just completely stop eating all whole foods and only drink protein shakes or something, and you're in a calorie deficit and you lose weight, that might be your goal, but you're gonna have health detriments down the line for not getting like the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and all the other benefits that you get from foods. So I would say they're both important. Good, healthful food choices are better for, using the word longevity, but like long-term success of making sure that your hormones, you're giving your hormones what you need, like you're getting all of the different nutrients that you need to build all the different structures, that your gut is happy and healthy. We have a lot of evidence coming out that if you wreck your gut, that's going to wreck a lot of other body systems, right? So for those reasons, for kind of like health optimization reasons, the food choices are going to be more important. For weight loss and weight loss only, the calorie deficit is more important. And I would recommend finding something that incorporates both.
Which is proves the point that it's important to work with a professional to understand what exactly are you eliminating or are you adding. Obviously, case specific depending on the goal for yourself, for the client. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good one. Is there a best diet?
Oh gosh. I shockingly get asked this like all the time. The literature would suggest that a Mediterranean style or DASH style diet, but again, that has no parameters in terms of cuisine. It has no parameter in terms of like what you must and must not eat every day. So overwhelmingly what we see is that populations that eat minimally processed, and there's also, you know, like working out and movement is a big piece of that as well. You know, I know we're just talking about diet, but and this is a totally different conversation of like blue zones and these populations that live really long and they're really healthy while they're living a long life. You know, diet is a huge piece, unprocessed foods, again, following sort of these guidelines of a balanced plate, plant forward, stuff like that. But, you know, you do see that being active and mobile and non-sedentary and community, all these other things also kind of roll into it. So,
yeah, it's a bit of a pie chart. No, it does. It's a bit of a pie chart, right? Nutrition only takes up a sliver of that pie chart, but no, that was great. We're gonna do one more question, and this was towards the end of the presentation. How do you know if you need to try the FODMAP diet? How would you know?
Oh, okay. So I always tell people there's a difference between like going to Olive Garden and being bloated after and truly experiencing IBS, irritable bowel syndrome bloating. If you eat a big meal, you're going to expect to bloat a little bit. That's normal. What's not normal is distension, meaning like you can't even suck it back in. It feels like it's about to burst. What's not normal is like urgency immediately following a meal. On the other end of that, you know, chronic constipation. So I kind of feel like, you know, if you're asking that question because you are experiencing these things, then yes, maybe that would be a time to try a FODMAP diet. Before somebody tries a FODMAP diet, I try to, again, I kind of hate these words, but I try to clean their diet up a little bit. Maybe it's just an excessive, you know, refined oils from fast food. Maybe it's just excessive sugar intake, something like that. Sometimes it's an easy fix, but if we kind of clean up the diet and you're still experiencing these things, then I would recommend a low FODMAP diet. So if you are consistently and persistently experiencing any of those types of symptoms, that could be a sign of IBS. So again, maybe sort of self-trial of, you know, cooking your food at home and building a balanced plate and seeing if that helps. And then if not, then I would probably recommend that be the next step.
Yeah, so before going on even any diet, looking at what you eat, quantity and the quality of the food first before you jump right into a highly restrictive diet would be the best step. Well, Marie, that was an incredible 3-part series, and what a way to end the nutrition series. Everyone, please, again, if you have suggestions or if you have recommendations on what we can tie onto this nutritional component for our next series, please let us know. We'll be happy to create that for you. But Marie, thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation tonight. Everyone, thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you.